that's the topic. It's telling our stories. And I will be the lead in this as Indigenous person, and the perspectives of the importance of community engagement with archives. So I've got, that's basically the topic of my presentation. And with the help of Amanda and Jodie, we'll talk through what PARADISEC does and what I will lead in terms of the Indigenous perspectives to working in archives. So firstly, the introduction to PARADISEC. We are known as the Pacific and Regional Archive for Digital Sources in Endangered Cultures. And it's a digital archive of records of mainly from the Pacific, but small cultures and languages of the world. So we're a consortium of 3 universities, University of Sydney, University of Melbourne, and the Australian National University. And it's funded by various organizations like the ARC, and LDECA and others. And I'll let Amanda to talk further about what we do and what we are doing and how we are connecting to communities, in which we'll take over from there.
Thanks, Steven. Yeah, so PARADISEC was founded in 2003 as a project that would digitize recordings of cultural heritage, particularly language recordings and music recordings, many of which were just sort of sitting in filing cabinets on old tapes, like the reel-to-reel tape that's in the image there, and were therefore really completely inaccessible, not only to someone who wasn't in the building near the filing cabinet, but to anyone who didn't have a reel-to-reel player, which these days is just about everyone in the world. So the objective back then in 2003 was to digitize these materials to make them available. But over the it's actually 23 years now, it's become a project that's very much focused not just on preserving recordings, but on making those recordings accessible. And we do that through building relationships of trust with Pacific cultural agencies with whom we work. We digitize recordings for them. We send back copies. That's often an iterative thing. Things are sent back again and again when they need to be. But we also build really sustainable, secure research infrastructure that makes sure that these materials will be looked after into the future. And we run different kinds of training as well. And increasingly, we're working very directly with community members, particularly diaspora in Australia. So the collection currently has records in something like 1,400 different languages. So I like to pause there just to kind of let that sink in. I mean, that's such a huge number of languages. And of course, all of you would know that the Pacific is a region of incredible language diversity. So huge numbers of those languages representing the collection come from the Pacific. You can see from that little map that there's a concentration of dots in the area all around Australia. That's because the vast majority of our collection comes from there. And there's some other numbers on the slide there that give you a sense of the breadth of the collection. There's 472,000 files, 820 collections, and so on. And you can see Jodie there digitizing. Jodie's one of our audio engineers and also runs the lab. And you can see her digitizing some of these old tapes, but we get things in all sorts of formats and also have some newly created technologies that can deal with things like tapes that don't seem to be able to play, that can be re-lubricated and now can be played. So that's some of the little quick background of PARADISEC, and I'll hand back to Steven to give you more enticing detail about the sort of work that he does.
Thank you, Amanda. You see on the screen, that is the model we operate here at PARADISEC. And we call that the archival loop. And you will notice that it's built on 4 pillars. First being prioritizing or empowering Indigenous voices, connection and reconnection, building relationships and own relationships, and enlivening the archive. So I'll talk a little bit about how this model works. And then later on, I'll give some examples of what we do. So the important thrust and focus on this is that I have a role of insider, outsider as a community member. So you can see from the diagrams there, the brown is the community, the speaker community, and then we have the archive. And what we've done is we've got these two models. The first diagram on top is actually the traditional model. It's static, it's one directional, and basically it just the flow that goes through. Sometimes the speaker communities don't even know what's inside the archive, and that includes me. When I joined PARADISEC, I was surprised that there exist some recordings and some archival materials that relate to my community, but I didn't know about. Then we worked on this dynamic process to basically have two-directional and have a feedback loop system where we connect back to communities. So we've also got I play the intermediary role as the insider-outsider to act on behalf of PARADISEC and the community and making the archive as a social hub. So the role that I play is to encourage and empower communities and indigenous peoples to get engaged with the archive. So in that way, whilst doing that, we are empowering indigenous voices. We are connecting cultural knowledge, and we just have to make sure there is cultural safety in the process when we work in this environment. And through collaboration, and see the yellow line there, that basically is looping back into communities. And we do it through outreach programs that we'll talk about, where it's being a digital archive, we use digital media. So we've got the podcast series, and we've got documentaries that we collaborate with. So my role as an Indigenous person here is fostering institutional and interdisciplinary arrangements as a cultural knowledge holder and of archival materials on behalf of communities. And that's where I engage with the recordings that belong to peoples and communities that have their recordings. So just ensuring cultural safety, accountability, and adding value for the long term. So bridging of the archives and communities. And it inspires storytelling, revitalization, and transmission of intergenerational knowledge in the process. So the next slide is basically trying to summarize all this. So we are enhancing the repository of cultural heritage recordings from Papua New Guinea, where I come from, and across Melanesia and the Pacific. So recently, we just reached out to Southeast Asia with the Philippines now. So we are moving boundaries now on how we reach out. So the community outreach, and they are all about drawing on my Pacific experiences, lived experiences, my culture, my language, by connecting the archive to communities through collaboration and relationship. So my role really is taking the archive to the community, reconnecting the archive to the community, and feeding the community insights back into the archive for future accessibility through metadata enrichment and engagement through responses from the recordings. So I have to walk the talk, and this is examples. So rather than me talking about what I do, I think we're here to see the sort of work that I've contributed towards PARADISEC. This is example number one. I'll have three examples. This is the first one, and this is about metadata enrichment. I've just pulled out of our catalog how it looked before. If you look on your left, that's how the collection and item reflected in the archive. Okay. So you might just notice there was just one line, and it says no indication of cape box of content. Now, for researchers and the community, how useful is this? It's just making meaning is really where I want to drive in my role in PARADISEC. Look at what's after. That was after engagement of a community, a diaspora community in Canberra. So after the engagement of community, we're able to populate and get descriptive metadata about what this particular item and recording was about. So it, talks about Paraveta is this example, is the PNG Paraveta singers of Canberra. And they defined what was all in there. They described what's all in there, and they even responded later in another collection that we will talk about as we go through. And the map on the bottom there is where all this cultural heritage is coming from. So that's example number one about data enrichment on collections of the MG1 collection, which is Murray Groves. The second example that's all flowery up there, that is from my home province in Papua New Guinea. It is one of the tribes of East New Britain province where I come from, and they are known for fire dances. I know in Fiji, they dance on rocks and all that. The Pacific has got all amazing culture and amazing traditions. This is the Binding Fire Dance. It's from the Binding tribes up in the hills of East New Britain. And it was part of the project of the Wantok Music Foundation called the Uramat Mungas. There was a film production, and these are some of the photographs and images that are part of that. That's in the archive. On the left is the description of these photos in the particular in the WM2 collection. So the next one I'll demonstrate further by showing a video of the binding dance. Again, on the left is the metadata in the archive, and on the right So this particular collection, WM2, it is the Wantok Music Foundation collection. I initiated that with my networks and collaboration with Wantok Music, which is a recording label for Indigenous and First Nations artists of Australia and Oceania, and mainly Melanesia. And my association with Wantok Music, I saw that need that they had all these recordings in hard drives, and I said, you got to archive this for future generations. So I'm being part of that organization in my other life. I thought it's important that I bring that in and collaborate. So this is a collaborative project that we're able to showcase what other institutions in this institutional networking process. So I brought that in as a new collection. So I was part of this process, and Jodie supports me on the work that we do along these lines. So this is how it came about. It was my initiative from a community organization about our community Indigenous peoples. The next one is closer to my heart. This is my personal collection. Now, in the process of an insider archives, I thought there's no point working on archives when I don't have my own collection. And also, I need to also do collections myself. So I became a collector. And I went to my community and across the province, and I just thought it's important to collect these old cassette tapes that have been sitting around since the late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all sitting in traditional houses. Like the conditions were not right to even digitize, but we had a bit of a journey in trying to digitize them because they were kind of all muddy, and we're in a volcanic region and there were volcano ash in them. And, we had to fix them up to make a collection. So I'll just showcase this example. Now this happens to come from my home village. And I want to showcase that choral music is something that's closer to the hearts of people. And I think I'll share it here and enjoy. The next example is strings music, and this is a typical string band, also from my home village, from a band called City Hikers. They went into the city and promoted the album, and this is it. Now I'll hand over to Jodie to talk more about our outreach projects, especially the Toksave Culture Talks, and over to you, Jodie.
Yes, so Steven and I co-produce the Toksave Culture Talks podcast, and this is an example of community outreach where this kind of collaborative approach connects. The four pillars are there on the poster that Steven talks about with the archival loop. The podcast, we interview people that have personal or cultural connections to collections in the archive. And it's a lot about the process of connecting with community members, usually through Steven's networks, but, through other ways as well. And then we share the collection with them. So there's this kind of, like, as Steven said, getting people to understand what's in the archive and to feel confident to have some kind of ownership over it because they get access to copies of it. We give them time, and then we interview them about their stories. So it's empowering Indigenous voices and getting their perspectives, which have often been left out for lots of reasons. And so having that kind of oral storytelling around collections really brings meaning to the archive. We've had a lot of times, like down the bottom, you can see Johnny Obed from Palma, where he's been involved in, I think, two episodes. He's spoken at a panel at the Conservatorium last year. The Peraveta one, where, working with Deveni, Temu, and then the choir, they have their own collection. They've actually now just been over to Singapore, connecting back to the people in the village back home. And so, it actually has shown that this kind of engagement leads to more engagement and more community involvement.
Thank you. All right, in conclusion, what are the lessons learned from Indigenous perspectives? It's institutional and professional experiences as an insider, outsider. Archives and speaker communities collaborate. Opening the archives through our outreach. So telling my story about my archival work is sharing what we do as archives practitioners to collaborate, to connect, to engage with our collections in communities through preservation and access of digital records from where they came from, thus contributing to community and cultural memory of heritage materials. Thank you, and it's Q&A time.
Thank you so much, Steven, Amanda, and Jodie. That was wonderful. We've got time for just one question. If anyone would like to raise a question, feel free to put it in the chat. There's some lovely comments in the chat around how special this has been. I loved, as you were showcasing those, the sounds and the imagery. Oh, I had goosebumps. It was wonderful. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Feel free to actually put in the chat as well. Pani, thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for sharing. It was really insightful to hear of the work that you're doing. My mind goes to how it's a continuation of storytelling, which is so profound in our Pacific way of knowing and understanding and being. My mind also goes to principles around data sovereignty and also Indigenous cultural intellectual property, and whether that's come up through your community engagement as factors of community wanting control over these how have you described it, these digital mediums.
All right. I'll probably ask Amanda first to talk about the PARADISEC principles that we follow, and then I can add on to my own. But definitely, we are very conscious of data sovereignty and intellectual property. So all of these things is governed around, sign-on forms and permissions. So maybe Amanda can start and can answer that together.
Yeah, so it might be great for you to talk, Stephen, about some of the conversations you've had with people in your collection. But in principle, as Stephen was saying, we have different kinds of conditions that can be put on collections. So we don't assert copyright over anything that's in the PARADISEC archive, but the function is to make it available to the people who should have access. And there's a few different levels of that. So things can be open to anyone, and that's in the case where people want their material to be openly accessible, they can select that option. A second option is that it's closed and there's access just for specified people. So sometimes there might be gender restrictions or other cultural restrictions, and we can sort of more or less show that a collection exists but not give access to anyone but named individuals who are there. And then there's another condition where things are completely private. But I think your question too points to the fact that a centralized archive, in this case in Australia, is holding all the materials while people might be dispersed around the Pacific. And I think that's always a tricky position to navigate, but it also reflects the realities of what the people at least who give us their materials want to be done with those materials. Sometimes it's a matter of saying, well, we would like to have the facilities here where we are to store them, but at the moment they're not quite ready. And so sometimes we actually hold things for short periods of time while people are preparing their own archive. And that's something I alluded to, sort of sending materials repeatedly. So with the Vanuatu Cultural Centre, for example, we've digitized things, sent them back. Sometimes there are different, climate conditions and different reasons that those copies are no longer there, and we send them again. And so it's a tricky space because, obviously we're in a privileged position of having lots of resources and stuff in a university, and so we can hold these things, but we're always trying to think about how to make sure that we're supporting other agencies in the Pacific to hold their own copies as well. So sometimes we see ourselves as an interim to, supporting those things to be set up, and sometimes it's holding the stuff that people have expressed desire for us to look after on their behalf, and that they get to determine the conditions of who should have access and who the appropriate people are to speak for the ownership rights of those collections. But it is a space that we're constantly sort of thinking about and paying attention to, because it's not simple. I think those are very important things that you raise.
Okay, as an Indigenous person, for starters, it's actually good that we have a repository of all these materials. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had them in the first place, or even to discuss them. And it's my role really is to go out there and see, whether the sensitivity is put in, the appropriateness is put in to all these recordings, and then we work out where it's appropriate and what's not appropriate. But it only happens because we already got the repository of these recordings. So I guess my role is to get that. And I personally have actually closed some items that I feel is not, to be accessible. It's got the intellectual properties involved. So in the process, we actually have forms to sign and also to give the opportunity for them to respond whether permission is allowed or whether it should be closed or open. So that process takes place while you're collaborating. It's hard to, know when we don't, put it out there, basically out to the community and reach out. Yeah.